My daughter stood in front of her husband's entire family at their anniversary party and called me a pathetic old woman who didn't know when to shut up. She looked me dead in the eye, surrounded by 50 of their most important friends and relatives, and said the words that shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tell us a duh.
Grandma Rose, you're embarrassing us. Nobody wants to hear your old stories. Can you please just sit in the corner and try not to ruin this for us? The laughter that followed from her in-laws felt like knives twisting in my chest. But what my daughter, Diana, didn't know was that her cruel words would cost her the venue of her dreams and the respect of everyone she was trying so desperately to impress. Because the next morning, I made a phone call that would change our family forever. My name is Rose Catherine Moreau, and I'm 72 years old. For the past 47 years, my entire world has revolved around one person, my daughter, Diana. Her father, my beloved husband Thomas, died in a car accident when Diana was only 3 years old, leaving me to raise her alone while working as a seamstress in a small alteration shop in downtown Millbrook. Those early years were the hardest of my life. I worked 12-hour days, hemming wedding dresses and taking in complex tailoring jobs, my fingers bleeding from needle pricks, my back aching from hunching over intricate beadwork. Every evening after closing the shop, I'd pick up Diana from Mrs. Henderson's daycare and come home to our tiny 2-bedroom apartment above the local bakery. The smell of fresh bread was a constant reminder of the comfort we couldn't afford. Bread was a luxury when you were choosing between groceries and keeping the lights on. But I had dreams for Diana that stretched far beyond our modest circumstances. I wanted her to have the education I never received, the opportunities that had been stolen from me when I left school at 16 to help support my own struggling family. Every night after Diana fell asleep, I would sit at our kitchen table with a shoebox full of crumpled bills and carefully count out whatever I could spare. Sometimes it was just $5, sometimes $20 if I'd had a particularly good week with wedding season orders. But every single dollar went into what I called Diana's future fund. I made sacrifices that Diana will never truly understand. When other women my age were buying themselves new dresses or treating themselves to dinner out, I wore the same 3 outfits in rotation, patching them when they wore thin and dyeing them when they faded. When Diana begged for the expensive sneakers all her classmates wore, I worked extra hours to buy them for her while continuing to wear shoes with holes in the soles, stuffing newspaper inside to keep my feet dry during Millbrook's harsh winters. The worst sacrifice was the loneliness. I was 28 when Thomas died, young enough to remarry, to find companionship, to build a new life. Several kind men showed interest over the years. There was Robert, the accountant who did the books for my shop, who brought me coffee every Tuesday and always asked about Diana's school achievements. There was Marcus, the widower from church, who invited me to dinner countless times and would have given Diana a stable father figure. But every time romance beckoned, I chose Diana instead. I convinced myself that she needed all my attention, all my resources, all my emotional energy focused solely on her success. By Diana's high school graduation, the Future Fund had grown to $47,000, enough to send her to State University without student loans. It wasn't Harvard money, but it was 4 years of freedom from the financial stress that had defined my entire adult life. Diana knew about the fund, of course. I'd mentioned it every time she complained about our small apartment or asked why we couldn't afford family vacations like her friends took. "We're building your future, sweetheart," I'd tell her when she rolled her eyes at our secondhand furniture or my homemade clothes. "Someday, you'll graduate, debt-free, and have opportunities I could only dream of." Diana did well in college, studying business administration and meeting her future husband, Richard, during her junior year. Richard came from what they call old money. His family owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. Suddenly, my daughter, who had grown up appreciating every dollar, was introduced to a world where money was never a consideration, where people spent more on a single dinner than I made in a month. The change in Diana was gradual but unmistakable. She started making excuses for why Richard couldn't come to our apartment. She'd meet him at restaurants instead of inviting him for my homemade dinners. When I offered to make her wedding dress, something I'd dreamed of since she was small, she gently declined, saying they'd already chosen a designer gown that cost more than I made in 6 months. "It's nothing personal, Mom," she'd said, but the way she avoided my eyes told a different story. Richard's family has certain expectations about the wedding. They've offered to pay for everything, so we should probably let them handle the details. I swallowed my disappointment and focused on being supportive. I used the last of Diana's college fund to pay for the flowers at her wedding, white roses and baby's breath that filled the sanctuary of Richard's family church. Nobody knew I had contributed anything. The wedding program listed the flowers as donated by the Richardson family, and I didn't correct the mistake. Diana's happiness was more important than my pride. After the wedding, I thought things might improve. Diana and Richard moved into a beautiful colonial house in Willowbrook Estates, about 20 minutes from my apartment. I hoped that once they were settled, Diana would remember the mother who had sacrificed everything for her success. I imagined Sunday dinners where I could cook for them, holidays where I could spoil their future children, a relationship where my years of devotion would finally be appreciated. Instead, I found myself becoming an increasingly peripheral figure in Diana's new life. Phone calls became less frequent. Invitations to family gatherings came with subtle suggestions about what I should wear or how I should behave. When Diana became pregnant with my first grandchild, I offered to help with childcare, thinking this might be my chance to become essential again. "That's so sweet of you, Mom," Diana had said, her voice carefully neutral. But Richard's mother has already arranged for a nanny, someone with proper credentials and experience with newborns. The message was clear. My love and 47 years of mothering experience weren't qualifications enough for the Richardson family standards. The grandchildren changed everything, but not in the way I had hoped. When little Emma was born, followed by James 2 years later, I thought surely Diana would need me again. Surely the sleepless nights and overwhelming responsibility of new motherhood would remind her of the bond we once shared. Instead, it only highlighted how far apart we had grown. Richard's mother, Vivian Richardson, swept into the role I had dreamed of occupying. She arrived at the hospital in designer clothes with professionally arranged flower bouquets, speaking in that cultured tone about proper child-rearing techniques and the importance of establishing routines early. When I showed up with a hand-knitted baby blanket I'd worked on for months, carefully choosing the softest yarn I could afford, Vivian glanced at it dismissively. "Oh, how quaint," she said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Handmade items are so rustic. We'll put it away for safekeeping." I watched my granddaughter being wrapped in a receiving blanket that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, while my labor of love disappeared into a closet somewhere. Diana said nothing, avoiding my wounded expression by busying herself with the flower arrangements Vivian had brought. The pattern continued as the children grew. When Emma started walking, I offered to babysit so Diana could have a break. "That's thoughtful, Mom, but we've already arranged for professional childcare. Emma's on a very specific schedule that might be hard for you to follow." When James began talking, I suggested reading to him from the collection of children's books I'd saved from Diana's childhood. We're using a Montessori-approved reading program now. The books need to meet certain educational standards. Every offer I made was politely declined, every attempt to help redirected to someone more qualified. I began to feel like a relic from Diana's past, something to be managed rather than embraced. Phone calls became scheduled appointments. "Let me check my calendar and call you back" became Diana's standard response to any invitation. The worst part was watching my relationship with my grandchildren develop at arm's length. Emma and James knew me as the grandmother who visited occasionally, who brought simple gifts that were quickly overshadowed by the elaborate toys their other grandmother provided. They were polite children, well-mannered, in that careful way that comes from rigorous training, but there was no spontaneous affection, no special bond forged through shared time and experiences. Richard's attitude toward me evolved from polite tolerance to barely concealed impatience. During family gatherings, he would guide conversations away from topics I might contribute to, steering discussions toward business deals and social events I couldn't relate to.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
When I mentioned my work at the alterations shop, he would change the subject quickly, as if my profession was somehow embarrassing to acknowledge. Rose still works downtown, he would say to his friends, the same way someone might mention that their elderly relative still drove despite failing eyesight, with patient resignation and underlying concern for public safety. Diana began adopting his mannerisms, his way of speaking about money and status as if they were natural laws rather than privileges. She stopped mentioning her childhood, the apartment above the bakery, the years when we counted every penny together. It was as if that version of herself had never existed, as if she had always lived in colonial houses with circular driveways and known the difference between winter and summer china patterns. The transformation became complete when Diana started working as an event coordinator for high-end parties. She had a natural talent for it, an eye for elegance that had somehow emerged despite our modest beginnings. Or perhaps because of them. She understood luxury the way only someone who had lived without it could truly appreciate it. Her business, Elegant Occasions by Diana, became popular among Millbrook's wealthy families who trusted her to create sophisticated celebrations that matched their social standards. I was proud of her success, genuinely thrilled that my sacrifices had enabled her to build something meaningful. But I also noticed that her professional life became another barrier between us. She would talk about client events with the kind of excitement she had once reserved for sharing school achievements with me. But these stories were filled with names I didn't recognize and references to venues I'd never seen.
"The Westbrook wedding is going to be incredible, Mom," she'd tell me during our increasingly brief phone calls. 300 guests at the Grandview Conservatory with a live orchestra and imported flowers. The budget is larger than most people's yearly salary. I would murmur appropriate congratulations, but I could hear the distance in her voice, the way she was sharing these details as if describing someone else's life rather than her own accomplishments. There was no invitation to see her work, no suggestion that I might attend one of these elaborate events, even as a spectator. The final insult came when Diana decided to throw Richard's parents a surprise anniversary party for their 40th wedding anniversary. She spent weeks planning the perfect celebration, booking the exclusive Grandview Conservatory, the same venue she had mentioned with such reverence in our phone conversations. She hired a jazz quartet, arranged for gourmet catering, and designed elaborate floral centerpieces that transformed the conservatory into a garden paradise. I learned about the party 3 days before it happened, and only because Diana needed someone to watch Emma and James while she supervised the setup. Not as a guest, as the babysitter. "I know it's short notice, Mom, but the kids would just be in the way during the preparations. You could take them to the park or something, keep them entertained until the party starts." "What time does the party start?" I asked, hoping against hope that I might be included in the celebration. 7 o'clock, but it's really just for Richard's family and their close friends. You understand, it's more of a business gathering than a family party. The guest list is pretty exclusive. I understood perfectly. I understood that the woman who had sacrificed 47 years of her life to give Diana opportunities was not considered worthy of attending a party in honor of people who had known her for less than 5 years. I understood that my granddaughter and grandson would see their paternal grandparents celebrated and honored, while their maternal grandmother waited in the parking lot with a Happy Meal and playground equipment. But I also understood something else. I was tired of understanding. I was tired of making excuses for being excluded, tired of accepting scraps of attention from the daughter I had raised to reach for the stars. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If Diana wanted to treat me like hired help rather than family, then perhaps it was time she learned what it truly meant to hire help, and more importantly, what it meant to lose the support she had taken for granted for so many years. The babysitting incident was just the beginning.
What I initially dismissed as wedding stress and new family dynamics soon revealed itself as something much deeper and more painful. Diana had begun to see me not as her mother, but as a liability to be managed in her new social circle. The first real sign came during Emma's 5th birthday party. Diana had planned an elaborate celebration at their house in Willowbrook Estates, complete with a bounce house, face painting, and a magician who charged more for 2 hours than I made in a week. The guest list included children from Emma's private kindergarten and their parents, doctors, lawyers, and business owners who comprised Diana's new social network. I arrived early, hoping to help with preparations, the way I had always done for Diana's childhood parties. I brought a homemade chocolate cake, Emma's favorite, decorated with careful buttercream roses that had taken me 3 hours to pipe. I had also sewn Emma a special birthday dress, a beautiful lavender creation with hand-embroidered flowers that showcased skills I had refined over decades of professional seamstress work. Diana's face fell when she saw the cake. "Oh, Mom, you didn't need to do that. We already ordered from Millbrook's finest bakery. You know, the one that does cakes for all the country club events." "I thought Emma might like having Grandma's chocolate cake, too," I said, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "She always asks for it when I visit." "That's sweet, but honestly, it might look a bit out of place next to the professional one. Maybe we could save yours for later, just for family." The professional cake was indeed stunning. 3 tiers of architectural perfection with fondant flowers that looked like porcelain. Next to it, my homemade offering did look humble, rustic even. But Emma's face lit up when she saw it through the kitchen window. "Grandma Rose's cake!" she squealed, pressing her nose against the glass. "With the roses! Can we have some now?" "After the party, sweetheart," Diana said quickly. "Let's let our guests see the pretty cake first." The dress situation was even more awkward. When I presented Emma with the lavender creation, she tried it on immediately, twirling in front of the mirror with genuine delight. "Look, Mama, Grandma made flowers on it." But Diana's expression was strained. "It's beautiful, Mom, really, but Emma's already dressed for the party." She gestured to the designer outfit Emma was wearing, a coordinated set that probably cost more than my monthly utilities bill. I watched my granddaughter reluctantly change back into her store-bought clothes, her disappointment carefully hidden behind the polite manners that had been drilled into her. In that moment, I realized that Diana wasn't just dismissing my gifts, she was teaching her children to dismiss them too. The party itself was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. When guests arrived and introductions were made, Diana would present me with careful precision. "This is my mother, Rose. She has a little alterations shop downtown." The word little always stung, delivered with an apologetic smile that suggested my life's work was somehow quaint but insignificant. During conversations, Diana would redirect attention away from me whenever possible. When Mrs. Pemberton, a prominent attorney's wife, complimented the beautiful flower arrangements, I mentioned that I had learned floral design through my alterations work, creating bouquets for budget weddings. "That's nice," Mrs. Pemberton said politely, but Diana immediately jumped in. "Actually, these arrangements are from Harrington's florist. They do all the events at the country club. Mom, didn't you want to check on the children in the bounce house?" I was being managed, dismissed, redirected away from conversations where I might not meet her social standards. By the end of the party, I felt like a servant who had been allowed to attend the festivities, but reminded to stay in her place. The pattern accelerated over the following months. Family dinners became increasingly rare, and when they did happen, they felt more like performances than gatherings. Diana would brief me beforehand about topics to avoid, people not to mention, stories from our past that might not resonate with Richard's family. "Maybe don't bring up the apartment above the bakery," she'd suggest gently, "or talk about work too much. Richard's parents are very focused on, well, they're interested in different kinds of conversations." The breaking point came during James's baptism. As the family gathered at the prestigious St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, I arrived wearing my best dress, a navy blue creation I had made myself, with hand-beaded details that had taken weeks to complete. I was proud of how I looked, confident that my craftsmanship could hold its own in any crowd. But when Diana saw me, her face went pale. "Mom, you look lovely, but maybe you could sit toward the back. The front pews are reserved for the godparents and immediate family." "I am immediate family?" I said quietly, confused by the request. "Of course you are. I just meant Richard's parents are sitting up front with the godparents, and there might not be enough room." I later learned that there had been plenty of room. Diana simply didn't want me prominently displayed during the ceremony, didn't want the elegant congregation to wonder about the woman in the obviously handmade dress who didn't quite fit their aesthetic expectations. The final straw came when Diana began excluding me from family photos. During James's first birthday celebration, the photographer Diana had hired took dozens of pictures of various family combinations. Richard with the children, Richard's parents with the grandchildren, Diana with her in-laws, the nuclear family in multiple poses. When I asked the photographer to take some pictures including me, Diana intervened with practiced diplomacy. "Let's just get the formal shots first, Mom. We can take casual ones later." Later never came. The formal shots were the only ones that mattered, the ones that would be framed and displayed, the ones that would tell the story of this family for future generations. And in that story, I simply didn't exist. I began to understand that Diana was systematically erasing me from the narrative of her new life. I had become an embarrassment, a reminder of humble beginnings that didn't align with the image she was crafting. My love, my sacrifices, my very presence had become obstacles to the social acceptance she craved. But what Diana didn't understand was that her attempts to hide me were teaching me something valuable about myself. I was tired of being hidden. I was tired of apologizing for the life I had built through honest work and genuine love. And most importantly, I was discovering that I had resources Diana knew nothing about. Resources that would soon shift the balance of power in ways she never could have imagined. The systematic exclusion from family photos was just the beginning of what would become an increasingly painful pattern of erasure. Diana had developed what I can only describe as a double life. One where she was the successful event coordinator married into Millbrook's elite society, and another where she occasionally acknowledged having a mother who existed somewhere on the periphery of respectability. The deception became most apparent during Diana's business networking events. She had joined the Millbrook Women's Professional Association, a group of high-achieving women who met monthly at the country club to discuss business opportunities and charitable initiatives. When I expressed interest in attending one of their public fundraising events, Diana's response was swift and crushing. "Oh, Mom, I don't think you'd enjoy it. It's really just a bunch of business talk and networking, very boring stuff. Plus, the tickets are quite expensive, probably not worth it for you." I later learned from Mrs. Henderson, who cleaned houses for several association members, that the event had been a lovely evening of dinner and silent auction, raising money for local literacy programs. Diana had been featured in the newspaper society section, photographed with several prominent community leaders as they presented a check to the Library Foundation. What hurt most was discovering that Diana had told people her mother lived in Florida. Mrs. Henderson mentioned this during one of our chance encounters at the grocery store. "Such a shame your daughter's mother lives so far away," she had said innocently. Diana was telling the ladies at the Pemberton house that her mother moved to a retirement community in Tampa after her husband died. Must be hard being so far from those beautiful grandchildren. I stood there in the cereal aisle, holding a box of Emma's favorite breakfast, trying to process the fact that my daughter had essentially killed me off and relocated my corpse to another state. The fictional version of Rose Moreau was safely contained in a retirement community hundreds of miles away, unable to embarrass Diana at important social functions or remind people of her modest origins. The lies multiplied as Diana's business grew more successful. When Elegant Occasions by Diana was featured in Millbrook Life magazine, the article mentioned her tragic early loss of both parents and how she had overcome adversity through determination and the support of her husband's loving family. I read those words standing in line at the grocery store, my hands shaking, as I realized my daughter had not only erased me from her present, but had rewritten our entire history. The article praised her instinctive understanding of elegance and natural sophistication that seems to come from generations of refined taste. There was no mention of the seamstress mother who had worked herself to exhaustion to pay for Diana's education, no acknowledgement of the small apartment where Diana had learned to appreciate beauty by watching me create something lovely from scraps and remnants. When I confronted Diana about the article, she was prepared with justifications that felt rehearsed. "It's just marketing, Mom. People in this business expect certain backgrounds. It doesn't mean anything personal. It means you told the entire city that I'm dead." "I didn't say you were dead. I said I lost my parents early. That could mean anything." "Diana, you know exactly what that implies." She sighed, that patient exhale she had perfected for dealing with my inconvenient existence. "Look, Mom, I'm trying to build something here. This business means everything to Richard and me. I need clients to trust my judgment, to believe that I understand their world. Having a mother who works in alterations and lives above a bakery, it just doesn't fit the image they expect." "The bakery building was sold 3 years ago," I said quietly. "I live in a regular apartment now." "You know what I mean." I did know what she meant, and that was the problem. I knew that my daughter was ashamed of the woman who had raised her, ashamed of the sacrifices that had made her success possible, ashamed of the love that had never wavered despite her growing coldness. The situation reached a new low during the spring charity auction at the country club. Diana was coordinating the event, and Emma had been chosen to present flowers to the guest speaker, a prominent philanthropist from the state capital. I had offered to make Emma a special dress for the occasion, something that would photograph beautifully and show off her sweet personality. Diana's refusal was immediate and absolute. "The dress has already been selected, Mom. It's from a children's boutique in the city. Everything needs to coordinate with the event's color scheme." "I could make something in whatever colors you need," I offered. "I have access to any fabric you could want." "It's not about the colors," Diana said, her patience clearly wearing thin. "It's about presentation. This is being covered by the regional news stations. Everything needs to look perfect." The implication was clear. My handmade dress, no matter how skillfully crafted, would not meet the standards of perfection required for public viewing. The same hands that had clothed Diana throughout her childhood, that had created her prom dress and graduation outfit, were now considered inadequate for dressing her daughter. I attended the charity auction anyway, sitting in the back with my ticket purchased anonymously online. I watched Emma present the flowers wearing a dress that was beautiful but generic, the kind of expensive outfit that could have been worn by any well-dressed child. But what broke my heart was watching Diana work the room with professional grace, introducing Emma to various dignitaries without ever once mentioning that the child's grandmother was sitting 30 feet away. The final insult came when the event photographer asked to take pictures of 3 generations of beautiful women, after spotting Emma with Diana and Vivian Richardson. I watched from my table as they posed together, Diana, her daughter, and her mother-in-law, creating the perfect family portrait for the society pages. When Emma spotted me across the room and waved excitedly, Diana quickly redirected her attention back to the photographer. "Look this way, sweetheart. Smile for the nice man." That's when I realized that Diana wasn't just excluding me from her life, she was actively training my grandchildren to forget I existed. Emma's natural affection for me was being systematically redirected, discouraged, managed away. In a few more years, I would be nothing more than a vague memory, the strange woman who used to bring homemade cakes and uncomfortable handmade dresses. I left the charity auction that night with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My daughter had made her choice. She had decided that social acceptance was more valuable than family loyalty, that image was more important than love, that her mother's presence was a liability to be minimized rather than a relationship to be cherished. But Diana had made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed that because I had always accepted her treatment quietly, because I had always prioritized her happiness over my own dignity, that I would continue to do so indefinitely. She had forgotten that the woman who had raised her alone, who had built a business from nothing, who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities, was not actually weak. She was about to learn the difference between patience and powerlessness. And she was about to discover that some humiliations, once delivered, cannot be taken back.
The invitation to Richard's parents' anniversary party arrived on expensive cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold embossing. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Richardson Sr. request the honor of your presence at a celebration of 40 years of marriage. The date was set for the first Saturday in June, and the venue was listed as the Grandview Conservatory, the most prestigious event space in Millbrook. What struck me most wasn't the formal language or the expensive paper, but the fact that my invitation had been addressed simply to Rose Moreau with no mention of my relationship to the family. Other invitations I glimpsed at Diana's house were addressed to couples or included family designations: Dr. and Mrs. Pemberton, the Harrison family, Uncle Robert and Aunt Catherine. Mine stood alone, as if I were merely an acquaintance who had somehow made it onto the guest list. Diana called the day after the invitations were mailed, her voice carrying that carefully modulated tone she used when managing potentially difficult situations. "I hope you can make it to the anniversary party, Mom. It's going to be lovely. Richard and I are handling all the coordination, of course." "Of course I'll be there," I said, surprised she would even question my attendance. "It's a family celebration." There was a slight pause. "Well, yes, but I wanted to talk to you about expectations. This is a very formal event, Mom. The guest list includes some of Millbrook's most prominent families, several business partners, and some people from the state capitol who are quite important to Richard's career." I could hear her choosing her words carefully, building up to something she was afraid to say directly. "The dress code is black tie optional, which means most people will be quite dressed up. I know formal events can be challenging for you, so I wanted to give you time to prepare." "I'll find something appropriate," I assured her, though I was already mentally calculating the cost of a suitable dress. "Actually, Mom, I was thinking, what if we went shopping together? I could help you pick out something that would be perfect for the venue. My treat, of course." The offer should have felt generous, but instead it felt like another form of management. Diana wanted to control how I looked, to ensure I met whatever standards she had established for this important event. Still, I accepted, hoping that shopping together might give us a chance to reconnect, to bridge some of the distance that had grown between us. The shopping trip was a disaster from the moment we entered Millbrook's most exclusive boutique. Diana immediately began speaking to the sales associate in code, requesting dresses that were age-appropriate and traditionally elegant, phrases that clearly meant conservative, understated, and forgettable. When I gravitated toward a beautiful navy dress with subtle beading, Diana steered me toward a shapeless brown outfit that looked more like a uniform than party attire. "This is perfect, Mom. Very sophisticated, very suitable." I tried on the brown dress and looked at myself in the three-way mirror, seeing an old woman who had been carefully packaged to blend into the background. The dress was expensive, but deliberately unremarkable, designed to render the wearer invisible. "I'd like to try the navy one," I said firmly. Diana's smile tightened. "The brown is more practical, Mom. Navy can be so harsh with your coloring." But I insisted, and when I emerged from the dressing room in the navy dress, even the sales associate couldn't hide her approval. The color brought out my eyes, the beading caught the light beautifully, and the cut was flattering without being inappropriate. "You look stunning," the associate said genuinely, and for a moment I felt like myself again, not an embarrassment to be managed, but a woman who deserved to feel beautiful. Diana's expression, however, told a different story. "It's a bit much, don't you think? Very attention-getting." I understood then that looking good was precisely what Diana didn't want. She wanted me present but unnoticed, included but insignificant. The brown dress would ensure I faded into the wallpaper, while the navy dress might actually make people notice me. I bought the navy dress. The week leading up to the party was filled with Diana's increasingly specific instructions disguised as helpful suggestions. She called to remind me that dinner would be served at 8, that cocktails would begin at 6:30, that there would be dancing after dinner. She mentioned that several prominent business leaders would be attending, that Richard was hoping to make important connections, that the evening was crucial for their social standing. "Just remember, Mom, this is really Richard's parents' night. Everything is about celebrating them and their 40 years together.
It's not about individual attention or personal stories. The message was clear. Don't speak unless spoken to, don't draw attention to yourself, don't remind anyone that Diana Richardson, née Moreau, came from humble beginnings. The morning of the party, Diana called one final time. You're planning to arrive around 7, right? That way you'll miss the receiving line but still be there for dinner. I hadn't realized there was a receiving line I was supposed to avoid. What time does the receiving line start? Oh, just early cocktails. Richard's parents want to greet their closest friends and family first. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, but I was beginning to understand that I was being deliberately excluded from the formal acknowledgments while still being expected to attend as a guest. I was to be present but not prominent, family but not close family. As I prepared for the evening, choosing jewelry to complement the navy dress and carefully styling my silver hair, I felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. This would be my first major social event in Diana's new world, my debut in the society she had worked so hard to join. Part of me hoped that seeing me in my element, dressed appropriately and behaving graciously, might help Diana remember that I wasn't actually the embarrassment she had convinced herself I was.
But another part of me, a part that was growing stronger each day, suspected that Diana had already decided how this evening would go, and that suspicion would prove more accurate than I could have imagined. The Grandview Conservatory was even more spectacular than I had imagined. As I walked through the entrance, I was struck by the soaring glass ceiling that showcased the early evening sky and the elaborate floral arrangements that transformed the space into an enchanted garden. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in ivory silk, each centerpiece a masterpiece of white roses and cascading greenery. Diana had outdone herself. This was elegance on a scale that rivaled any society wedding I had ever seen photographed in magazines. I arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, as instructed, and immediately felt the weight of being underdressed, despite my careful preparations. The other guests were indeed magnificently turned out. The women in designer gowns that cost more than most people's cars, the men in perfectly tailored tuxedos with accessories that spoke of generations of refined taste. My navy dress, which had seemed so beautiful in the boutique, suddenly felt adequate at best. Diana spotted me immediately and approached with a smile that looked genuine from a distance but felt forced up close. She was radiant in a champagne-colored gown that complemented her auburn hair perfectly, every inch the successful event coordinator who belonged in this rarefied world. "Mom, you made it. You look lovely," she said, air-kissing my cheek in a gesture that felt performative rather than affectionate. "Let me show you to your table." She guided me through the crowd, past clusters of guests engaged in animated conversations about mutual acquaintances and recent travels to places I had only seen in magazines. I nodded politely when introduced, but Diana's presentations were brief and designed to move quickly past me rather than encourage extended conversation. "This is my mother, Rose," she would say with that careful smile, then immediately redirect. "Have you met the Harrisons? They just returned from their villa in Tuscany." My table was in the back corner of the conservatory, with other guests who seemed to be, like me, peripheral to the main event. There was an elderly gentleman who turned out to be Richard's former accountant, a couple who were distant cousins from out of state, and several other people who had clearly been placed at what I was beginning to recognize as the courtesy table, people who needed to be invited but weren't central to the celebration. During cocktails, I watched Diana work the room with professional grace, moving seamlessly between groups, ensuring everyone felt welcomed and entertained. She was in her element, and I felt a genuine surge of pride watching her command the space with such confidence. This was what all my sacrifices had been for, to give her the education and opportunities that would allow her to shine in situations like this. But as the evening progressed, I also noticed how carefully Diana managed my interactions with other guests. When Mrs. Pemberton approached our table to compliment the beautiful arrangements, I mentioned that Diana had always had an eye for design, even as a child arranging wildflowers in mason jars in our little apartment. Diana appeared beside us almost immediately.
Mom, would you mind checking on Emma and James? They're getting restless in the children's area. It was a polite dismissal, removing me from a conversation before I could share any more details about our modest past. The pattern repeated throughout the cocktail hour. Anytime I began connecting with other guests or sharing stories that might reveal too much about Diana's origins, she would materialize with a task or redirection that pulled me away. The real humiliation began during dinner when Richard's father, William Richardson Sr., stood to make a toast. He spoke eloquently about 40 years of marriage, about the family they had built together, and about the joy of watching their son Richard find happiness with Diana. The speech was warm and inclusive, mentioning various family members and close friends who had been important to their journey. When he finished, Richard stood to respond, thanking his parents and speaking about the example they had set for his own marriage. Then he gestured toward Diana, inviting her to say a few words about the celebration she had coordinated. Diana rose gracefully, commanding the attention of all 50 guests as she spoke about the honor of organizing the celebration for two people who had shown her what true partnership looked like. She thanked various vendors and helpers by name, acknowledged Vivian's input in the planning process, and expressed gratitude for being welcomed into such a loving family. She was eloquent and poised, everything I had hoped she would become. But as her speech continued, I realized with growing horror that she was systematically acknowledging everyone who had contributed to her success, except the person who had made it all possible. She thanked her college professors who had encouraged her business aspirations. She thanked Richard for believing in her talents. She thanked her in-laws for their guidance and support. She thanked the Millbrook Women's Professional Association for their mentorship. But there was no mention of the mother who had worked double shifts to pay for that college education, no acknowledgement of the woman who had sacrificed everything to give her the foundation for success. As Diana's speech drew to a close, she looked directly at me across the room. For a moment, I thought she was finally going to acknowledge my presence, to include me in this narrative of gratitude and family celebration. Instead, she smiled that carefully practiced smile and said the words that would shatter my heart completely. I also want to thank everyone here tonight for understanding that sometimes family celebrations need to focus on the people who truly matter, the ones who have shaped us into who we are today. The applause that followed felt like thunder in my ears. Diana had just publicly announced to 50 of Millbrook's most influential people that I was not among the people who truly mattered, that I had not shaped her into who she was today. I sat there in my navy dress, surrounded by strangers at the courtesy table, and realized that my daughter had just erased me from her life story in the most public and humiliating way possible. The rest of Diana's speech became a blur of polite applause and shifting chairs as guests prepared for the dancing portion of the evening. I sat frozen at my table, replaying her words in my mind, trying to convince myself that I had misunderstood, that she hadn't just publicly declared me irrelevant to her life story. But the sideways glances from other guests confirmed what I already knew. Several people at nearby tables were whispering, their eyes darting toward me with expressions that ranged from confusion to pity. They had witnessed something uncomfortable, a family dynamic that didn't quite make sense in the context of a celebration. Mrs. Harrison, the woman seated to my left, leaned over with genuine concern. "Are you all right, dear? You look a bit pale." Before I could respond, Diana appeared at my table with that bright hostess smile she had perfected for managing difficult situations. "How is everyone doing over here? Having a wonderful time?" She placed her hand on my shoulder in a gesture that looked affectionate from a distance, but felt like a warning up close. "Mom, you've been so quiet tonight. I hope you're enjoying yourself." I looked up at my daughter, this poised woman in her expensive gown who commanded such respect from everyone around her, and felt something crack inside my chest. She was giving me an opportunity to play along, to smile and nod and pretend that everything was fine, to maintain the fiction that I was just another guest, rather than the woman who had made her entire life possible. "I was just thinking about your father," I said quietly,
my voice barely audible above the string quartet that had begun playing for dancing, about how proud he would be of what you've accomplished. Diana's smile faltered slightly. She hadn't expected me to mention Thomas, hadn't anticipated that I might bring up our shared history in front of her new social circle. That's very sweet, Mom," she said, her voice carrying a slight edge. "But tonight is really about celebrating the Richardsons. Maybe we could save the personal memories for later?" "Of course," Mrs. Harrison interjected, clearly sensing the tension. "Thomas was your late husband. How wonderful that he could see his daughter's success through your eyes." Diana's face went white. She had never told anyone in this crowd about her father, had never mentioned that she was the daughter of a widowed seamstress rather than the product of an intact upper-middle-class family. The fictional version of her life didn't include a father who had died young, or a mother who had struggled to raise her alone. "Yes, well," Diana stammered, glancing around to see if anyone else had overheard. "That was a long time ago." "Not so long," I said. 24 years this October. He was a good man, a construction worker who died building the foundation for the new hospital wing. He used to say that strong foundations were the most important part of any structure, that everything beautiful had to be built on something solid. I could see Diana's panic building as other guests at nearby tables began to listen. This wasn't part of the narrative she had constructed, wasn't consistent with the elegant origin story she had crafted for herself. "Mom," she said sharply, then caught herself and lowered her voice. "This really isn't the time or place for—" "For what?" I asked, genuinely confused. "For remembering your father? For talking about the man who would have been so proud to see his daughter coordinate such a beautiful celebration?" The string quartet finished their song, and in the brief silence that followed, my words carried further than I had intended. Several guests at surrounding tables had turned to listen, curious about this unexpected glimpse into their hostess's past. Diana's professional composure was beginning to crack. Could we please discuss this later, privately? But something inside me had broken free, some dam of accumulated hurt and frustration that I could no longer contain. "You know, your father had such dreams for you. He used to say that you were going to be something special, that you were going to make the world more beautiful. And you have, sweetheart. Look at this place. It's absolutely stunning." I gestured around the conservatory, taking in the elegant decor that showcased Diana's considerable talents. "He would have been so proud to see you create something this magnificent. He always believed that honest work and genuine love could build anything." Diana's face had gone from white to red. She was trapped between her desire to stop me from talking and her need to maintain her gracious hostess persona in front of 50 influential guests. "That's lovely, Mom, but I still have his tools, you know," I continued, the words spilling out of me now like water through a burst pipe. "In my little apartment. The same apartment where you used to help me sew beads on wedding dresses when you were small. You had such tiny fingers, perfect for the delicate work. You were my little helper, my partner in making beautiful things." Diana's face had gone from white to red. She was trapped between her desire to stop me from talking and her need to maintain her gracious hostess persona in front of 50 influential guests. "That's lovely, Mom, but I still have his tools, you know," I continued, "in my little apartment. The same apartment where you used to help me sew beads on wedding dresses when you were small. You had such tiny fingers, perfect for the delicate work. You were my little helper, my partner in making beautiful things." The silence around us was becoming profound. Other conversations had stopped as people strained to understand what was happening at the courtesy table in the back corner. Diana's carefully constructed image was unraveling in real time, and everyone could see it happening. That's when Diana said the words that changed everything between us forever. She straightened to her full height, assumed the cold, professional tone she used with difficult vendors, and spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Grandma Rose, you're embarrassing us. Nobody wants to hear your old stories.
Can you please just sit in the corner and try not to ruin this for us? The laughter that followed from Richard's business associates felt like physical blows. But it was the look on Diana's face that destroyed me completely. Not embarrassment or regret, but relief. Relief that she had finally said what she had been thinking for years, that she had finally put me in my place in front of everyone who mattered to her new life. I sat there in my navy dress that no longer felt beautiful, surrounded by the shocked silence of strangers, and realized that my daughter had just publicly disowned me at the most important social event of her career. The silence that followed Diana's words was deafening. 50 of Millbrook's most prominent citizens had just witnessed a daughter publicly humiliate her mother in the most cruel and calculated way possible. The string quartet had stopped playing, conversations had ceased, and even the waitstaff had paused in their duties to stare at our table in shocked disbelief. I looked around the room at faces that ranged from horrified to embarrassed to disgusted. Mrs. Harrison beside me had actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. Even some of Richard's business associates, who had laughed at Diana's dismissal moments before, now looked uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. But it was the expression on William Richardson Sr.'s face that told me everything I needed to know about how this moment would be remembered. The patriarch of the family Diana had worked so hard to impress was looking at his daughter-in-law with undisguised disapproval, his earlier warmth replaced by the kind of cold judgment that comes from witnessing behavior that violates every principle of decency and family loyalty. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me, and gathered my small purse from the table. The navy dress that had made me feel beautiful just hours ago now felt like a costume I had worn to a play where I didn't know my lines. "You're right, Diana," I said quietly, my voice carrying in the unnatural silence. "I am embarrassing you. I'm embarrassing you by existing, by remembering our life together, by loving you despite everything." Diana's face had gone pale again, and I could see her beginning to realize that she had gone too far, that her public cruelty had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Mom, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted gently. "You meant every word. And you know what? I finally understand what you've been trying to tell me all these years. I don't belong in your new life. I'm a reminder of things you'd rather forget, a connection to a past that doesn't fit the story you want to tell about yourself." I looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of people who had just witnessed the most shameful moment of my life. "I want to apologize to everyone here for disrupting such a beautiful celebration. Mr. and Mrs. Richardson, congratulations on 40 wonderful years together. You're truly blessed to have each other." Then I looked directly at Diana, my daughter who had just broken my heart in front of everyone who mattered to her. "And Diana, thank you for finally being honest with me about how you really feel. It's been illuminating." I walked toward the exit with as much dignity as I could manage, my heels clicking on the marble floor in the profound silence. Behind me, I could hear whispered conversations beginning to resume, but with an uncomfortable energy that suggested the evening had been irreparably damaged. As I reached the entrance, I heard footsteps behind me. "Mrs. Moreau, please wait." I turned to find William Richardson Sr. approaching, his distinguished face etched with concern and something that looked like genuine anger. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly, glancing back toward the conservatory where his daughter-in-law was trying to salvage the celebration. "What just happened? That's not how we raised our son to treat family. That's not how anyone should treat their mother." "It's not your fault, Mr. Richardson," though his kindness threatened to break what remained of my composure. "Diana made her choice. A terrible choice," he said firmly, "and one that reflects poorly on all of us. I want you to know that Vivian and we had no idea. Diana told us you lived in Florida, that you were in poor health and unable to travel. Another lie.
Another fiction designed to keep me safely distant from her new reality. She's been ashamed of me for a long time, I admitted. I just didn't realize how deep that shame ran. William's expression darkened. Shame? She should be proud. Do you know what she told us about how she learned event planning? She said she had a natural eye for elegance, that it came from her refined upbringing. But watching you tonight, seeing your grace under impossible circumstances, I think I understand where her real talents came from. His words were kind, but they also confirmed what I had suspected. Diana had rewritten our entire history, turning years of struggle and sacrifice into a fairy tale of inherited sophistication. I should go, I said, not trusting myself to continue this conversation without falling apart completely.
Mrs. Moreau, William said as I turned toward the door, I hope you'll reconsider cutting ties with your grandchildren. Emma and James, they shouldn't pay the price for their mother's mistakes. I nodded, unable to speak, and walked out into the cool June evening. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for the expensive cars belonging to the guests still inside, still trying to salvage some enjoyment from an evening that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. I sat in my old Honda for several minutes, my hands shaking as I processed what had just happened. 24 years ago, I had lost my husband in a tragic accident. Tonight, I had lost my daughter to something far more devastating, her deliberate choice to value social acceptance over family loyalty. But as I drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, something unexpected began to emerge from the wreckage of my shattered heart. For the first time in decades, I felt completely free. Free from the burden of trying to fit into Diana's life, free from pretending that her cruelty was acceptable, free from apologizing for existing. Diana had made her choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and a manila folder I hadn't opened in years, the one labeled Investment Portfolio in my careful handwriting. For so long, I had lived like the poor seamstress Diana believed me to be, driving the old Honda, shopping at discount stores, living in my modest apartment. But the truth was far more complicated than my daughter could ever imagine. The first document in the folder was dated 15 years ago, a certificate showing my purchase of a small commercial building on the outskirts of town for $45,000. It had seemed like a huge risk at the time, using money I had saved from years of alterations work. But the building had come with 3 reliable tenants, and the rental income had allowed me to purchase another property 2 years later. By the time Diana graduated from college, I owned 4 rental properties. While she was in university, believing her mother was struggling to make ends meet, I was quietly reinvesting rental profits into more real estate. The modest seamstress who hemmed dresses for $20 was also a landlord collecting thousands in monthly rent. But my real transformation had come 5 years ago when the city announced plans to revitalize the downtown district. I had recognized the opportunity immediately and began purchasing neglected buildings in the historical area, using every dollar of rental income and every penny of profit from my alterations business. While Diana was busy climbing the social ladder, her embarrassing mother was building a real estate empire. The crown jewel of my portfolio was a purchase I had made just 8 months ago, a struggling event venue that had been bankrupted by the pandemic. The previous owners had been forced to sell at a significant loss, and I had acquired the property for less than half its pre-pandemic value. That venue was the Grandview Conservatory. I owned the building where Diana had just humiliated me in front of Millbrook's elite society. The elegant glass structure with its soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers belonged to me, purchased through a limited liability company I had established to protect my privacy. Diana had no idea that her successful event coordination business depended entirely on venues owned by the mother she found so embarrassing. But the conservatory wasn't my only relevant holding. I pulled out more documents, spreading them across my kitchen table like puzzle pieces of a larger picture.
The Millbrook Country Club, where Diana had joined the Women's Professional Association, I owned the mortgage on their property after they had refinanced during the economic downturn. The boutique where Diana had insisted on buying me that forgettable brown dress, my company owned the building and collect rent from every shop in the plaza. The Harrington's florist that Diana favored for her high-end events sourced their exotic flowers through an import company I had quietly acquired 2 years ago. The luxury car dealership where Richard's family made their fortune, they leased their showroom space from a commercial real estate holding company I had purchased 6 months ago. For years, while Diana had been systematically erasing me from her life story, she had been unknowingly building her success on the foundation of my investments. Every elegant event she coordinated, every social connection she made, every step up the ladder of Millbrook society had been subsidized by the woman she considered an embarrassment. The irony was perfect and devastating. Diana had spent years hiding me from her social circle, never realizing that her pathetic mother secretly owned half the venues where she entertained them. I gathered the documents back into their folder and reached for my phone. It was 6:30 a.m., early enough to catch people before their day began, late enough to seem urgent and important. My first call was to Marcus Blackwood, the attorney who had handled all my property acquisitions. Marcus, it's Rose Moreau. I need you to prepare some documents for me, immediately. Rose, it's quite early. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, I said, and for the first time in years, I meant it completely. I need to make some changes to my business arrangements, starting with the Grandview Conservatory. At precisely 9 a.m. on Monday morning, my attorney Marcus Blackwood walked into Diana's office at Elegant Occasions with a folder of legal documents and a smile that suggested he was about to deliver very interesting news. I wasn't there to witness it personally, but Marcus called me immediately afterward to describe Diana's reaction. According to him, she had been in the middle of planning a summer wedding when he arrived, her desk covered with fabric samples and venue photographs, completely absorbed in the work that had made her Millbrook's most sought-after event coordinator. "Mrs. Richardson," Marcus had said formally, using her married name, "I represent Morrow Holdings, LLC. We need to discuss your business arrangements with our properties." Diana had looked up from her planning materials with mild irritation. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any business arrangements. With who did you say?" "Morrow Holdings. We own several venues that you utilize regularly for your events." Marcus told me he could see the exact moment recognition dawned on Diana's face. The color drained from her cheeks as she realized that Morrow wasn't a coincidence, that the mother she had humiliated 3 days earlier shared a surname with the mysterious company that apparently owned her favorite venues. That's not possible," she had stammered. "My mother works in alterations. She doesn't own anything." Marcus had opened his folder with deliberate precision. "Actually, Miss Richardson, your mother owns quite a bit, starting with the Grandview Conservatory, where I understand you recently coordinated an anniversary celebration." Diana's hands had started shaking as Marcus spread property deeds across her desk, each one bearing my name as the owner of venues she had considered cornerstones of her business success. That's not possible," she had stammered. "My mother works in alterations. She doesn't own anything." Marcus had opened his folder with deliberate precision. "Actually, Miss Richardson, your mother owns quite a bit, starting with the Grandview Conservatory, where I understand you recently coordinated an anniversary celebration." Diana's hands had started shaking as Marcus spread property deeds across her desk, each one bearing my name as the owner of venues she had considered cornerstones of her business success. "There must be some mistake," Diana had insisted, but her voice was weak, uncertain. "No mistake. And I'm here to inform you that Morrow Holdings is immediately terminating all business relationships with Elegant Occasions. Effective today, you no longer have access to the Grandview Conservatory, the Riverside Pavilion, the historic Millbrook Mansion, or the Crystal Ballroom." Marcus said Diana had gone completely silent at that point, staring at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language.
But I have events booked, she had whispered. Weddings scheduled for the next 6 months. People have made deposits, sent invitations. That's unfortunate, Marcus had replied with professional neutrality. But Morrow Holdings has decided that Elegant Occasions doesn't align with our company values regarding family respect and personal integrity. The devastating blow came next. Additionally, we're notifying all our business partners about this termination. Harrington's Florist, Mitchell Catering, Premier Photography, and Classical Strings Quartet have all been informed that any events coordinated by Elegant Occasions will not be supported by Morrow Holdings properties or vendors. Diana had sunk into her chair as the implications became clear. Not only was she losing access to her most prestigious venues, but she was also being cut off from the network of vendors who made her events possible. The same vendors she had always praised for their exclusive standards and selective client base. "This will destroy my business," Diana had said, no longer attempting to maintain her professional composure. "Your business was built on properties owned by someone you publicly declared irrelevant to your success," Marcus had replied. "Morrow Holdings is simply making that statement true." Before leaving, Marcus had delivered my final message. "Mrs. Moreau wanted me to tell you that she finally understands her place in your life. She's exactly what you said she was, nothing. And nothing is exactly what you'll be getting from her going forward." When Marcus called to report the meeting's outcome, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced in years. Diana had spent decades taking my support for granted, never imagining that her embarrassing mother possessed any real power. Now she was about to learn what her life looked like without the foundation I had quietly provided. And unlike the fictional stories she told about her origins, this lesson would be perfectly, undeniably real. The phone started ringing at 11:47 a.m. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to Diana's panicked voice pleading with me to call her back, saying there had been some terrible misunderstanding, that we needed to talk immediately. I deleted the message and went about my day. Over the following weeks, I watched from a distance as Diana's carefully constructed world began to unravel. Word travels fast in Millbrook social circles, and the story of the anniversary party humiliation had spread like wildfire. But more damaging than the gossip was the practical reality of losing access to her most prestigious venues and vendors. Mrs. Henderson, who cleaned houses throughout the wealthy neighborhoods, became my inadvertent source of information about Diana's mounting crisis. The Pemberton wedding, scheduled for July at the Grandview Conservatory, had to be moved to a lesser venue across town. The Mitchell anniversary celebration was postponed indefinitely when Diana couldn't secure appropriate catering. 3 engagements were canceled entirely when couples decided they couldn't trust an event coordinator who had lost access to Millbrook's premier locations. "People are saying she must have done something terrible," Mrs. Henderson reported during one of our grocery store encounters. "Nobody just loses their business relationships overnight unless there's been some serious wrongdoing." The social consequences were perhaps even more devastating than the professional ones. Diana's membership in the Millbrook Women's Professional Association was quietly allowed to lapse when she couldn't afford the dues without her venue commissions. The invitations to charity galas and society luncheons stopped coming when she was no longer seen as a valuable networking contact.
Most painful of all, according to Mrs. Henderson's reports, was watching Diana's relationship with Richard's family deteriorate. William Richardson Sr. had apparently been quite vocal about his disgust with Diana's treatment of me, and Vivian had stopped including Diana in the family's social planning. Mrs. Richardson told the Garden Club that some people reveal their true character under pressure, Mrs. Henderson had whispered conspiratorially, said that Diana's behavior at the anniversary party was utterly appalling and not reflective of the values they thought they were welcoming into their family. But the most heartbreaking reports came about Emma and James. With Diana working desperately to salvage her business and Richard pulling extra hours to compensate for lost income, the children were spending more time with babysitters and less time with their parents. The elaborate birthday parties and family outings had stopped, replaced by the kind of modest celebrations Diana had once scorned. After 2 months of silence, Diana showed up at my apartment door at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday evening. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her designer clothes wrinkled and ill-fitting, as if she had lost weight from stress. "Mom," she said simply, her voice broken, "I need to talk to you." I invited her in and made tea while she sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had counted pennies for her college fund all those years ago. She looked around the modest apartment as if seeing it for the first time, noticing details she had always overlooked or dismissed. "I lost everything," she said finally. "My business, my reputation, my standing in the community. Richard's family barely speaks to me. The children keep asking why we can't do the things we used to do." I set a cup of tea in front of her and waited. This wasn't the time for me to speak. "I know you think I deserve this," Diana continued, tears finally starting to fall. "And maybe I do. But Mom, I need you to know that I never meant for things to get so bad between us. I never meant to hurt you the way I did." For the first time in months, I heard echoes of the daughter I had raised, the girl who had once appreciated every sacrifice I made for her future. But I also knew that desperation could make people say things that didn't really mean. "What exactly are you sorry for, Diana?" I asked quietly. "What specifically do you think you did wrong?" Diana was quiet for a long moment, staring into her tea as if the answer might be written in the steam rising from the cup. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear, and I saw something in them I hadn't seen in years, genuine remorse rather than self-pity. "I'm sorry for being ashamed of you," she said simply. "I'm sorry for lying about who you were, where you lived, what you meant to me. I'm sorry for treating you like an embarrassment when you were the strongest, most capable woman I've ever known." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "I'm sorry for that night at the anniversary party. There's no excuse for what I said to you in front of all those people. You didn't deserve that cruelty, especially not from the daughter you sacrificed everything to raise." I reached across the table and took her hand, feeling how much weight she had lost, seeing the toll that losing everything had taken on her. "Most of all," Diana whispered, "I'm sorry it took losing everything to realize that I had already lost the most important thing years ago. I spent so much time trying to fit into a world that would never truly accept me that I forgot to value the one person who loved me unconditionally." We sat in silence for several minutes, two women who had found their way back to each other through heartbreak and hard-learned lessons. "I've been thinking about what Dad would say if he could see us now," Diana said eventually. "He always told me that the strongest foundations were built to last, even when everything above ground got torn down." I smiled at the memory of Thomas's construction wisdom. He also said that sometimes you have to clear away everything that's unstable before you can build something that will endure. "Can we build something new, Mom? Something honest this time?" I squeezed her hand gently. "We already have, sweetheart. We already have." Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, covering Millbrook in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new again. Diana was right. We had lost everything that was false between us, but in doing so, we had found something far more valuable, a relationship built on truth, respect, and the understanding that real family love doesn't require perfection, only honesty. We sat in silence for several minutes, two women who had found their way back to each other through heartbreak and hard-learned lessons. "I've been thinking about what Dad would say if he could see us now," Diana said eventually. "He always told me that the strongest foundations were built to last, even when everything above ground got torn down." I smiled at the memory of Thomas's construction wisdom. He also said that sometimes you have to clear away everything that's unstable before you can build something that will endure. "Can we build something new, Mom? Something honest this time?" I squeezed her hand gently. "We already have, sweetheart. We already have." Outside, the first snow of winter was beginning to fall, covering Millbrook in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new again. Diana was right. We had lost everything that was false between us, but in doing so, we had found something far more valuable,
A relationship built on truth, respect, and the understanding that real family love doesn't require perfection, only honesty. The venues could be returned, the business could be rebuilt, but the lesson we had both learned about what truly mattered, that was a foundation that would last forever.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.